Here it comes, the biggest tax whistleblowing bombshell yet. Kings, presidents, prime ministers, former prime ministers, among those outed so far in the Pandora Papers. Yes, it's the same sophisticated shell game exposed by LuxLeaks, the Panama Papers, and other data dumps that name and shame the high and mighty, who stash their cash far from prying eyes. What's new since last time? Well, you might say COVID. The gap between the haves and have-nots of this world went into overdrive the past 18 months, with the winners of the planet's digital acceleration raking in record profits, and the pressure mounting on politicians to come up with a fairer system of taxation and redistribution of wealth. Now, ahead of a crucial G20 summit at the end of the month in Rome, a meeting of rich nations of the OECD here in Paris this week will try to agree on the first rewrite of global taxation rules in more than a century. Will the Pandora Papers make a difference? One nation may be key, the United States, whose Secretary of State will be in the French capital at the OECD on Tuesday. With the home of the dollar imposing banking transparency on the rest of the planet, will Washington agree to reciprocity, open its books, particularly in tax havens such as Delaware, Nevada, South Dakota? Beyond the U.S., the OECD estimates the overall sums stashed offshore at $11.3 trillion. What damage does that do to the global economy? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if these Pandora Papers will change the conversation. And one of those who's been poring over the data for the past 8 months, investigative reporter Luc German, executive producer at documentary filmmakers Première Ligne. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, George.
Welcome as well to Nathalie Janson, economist, associate professor at the Neoma Business School. How are you?
Fine.
And with us as well, Craig Kapitas, contributing editor at Quartz. You're the author of Metal Men, Mark Rich, and the $10 billion Scam, which was written
in the early 80s, which is the origin story of what we're talking about tonight.
So we'll ask you if the song remains the same in a moment. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Journalists painstakingly connecting those dots, some 1,000 offshore companies, 336 high-level politicians and public officials so far, including 35 current and former world leaders. Marius Sophos has more.
It's one of the largest ever global media investigations, involving more than 600 journalists who've analysed some 11.9 million financial documents. The leaked records implicate hundreds of world leaders, politicians, billionaires, celebrities, religious leaders and drug dealers. For the past 25 years, they've been using offshore accounts to hide their investments in luxury properties, yachts and other valuable assets, collectively worth trillions of dollars. The report was released by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists.
We have emails, passport copies, bank statements that show how presidents, kings, princesses, billionaires and criminals hide and move money.
Among the more than 330 current and former politicians identified as beneficiaries of the offshore accounts are Jordan's King Abdullah II, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, and the Czech Republic's Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, who denied any wrongdoing on Sunday.
Tak, nechte mě to říct, to je důležité.
Pane premiére,
ty peníze odešly z České banky, byly zdaněné, byly to moje peníze a vrátily se do České banky.
Many of the secret accounts were designed to evade or avoid taxes. Tony Blair, who has been a vocal critic of tax loopholes, is shown to have been legally avoiding the payment of stamp duty on a multi-million-pound property in London. The Pandora Papers are the latest in a series of mass leaks of financial documents, including the 2016 Panama Papers, which led to the resignation of Iceland's leader at the time and set the stage for the ousting of Pakistan's former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif.
So the Panama Papers did get results 5 years ago. Luc German, what are you expecting from the Pandora Papers?
I believe the same kind of attention from the public opinion. This time there are 150 media organizations, 600 journalists throughout the world worked on those 11.9 million documents, as your reporter was referring to. Gerard Ryle, who heads the ICIJ, so the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Consortium seems like it's a big multinational company. It's more or less like an NGO, regrouping dedicated journalists who work in not in disguise, but in total confidentiality for many months. And Gerard Heil is saying the Pandora Papers are like the Panama Papers on steroids because there are many more people
Now, you
involved.
worked on the Panama Papers, and we're going to ask you in a second about the documentary you worked on. But did you feel like it was on steroids yourself?
This time, yes.
Was that your personal feeling?
Yes, definitely, because of the mass of documents, 11.9 million documents. It's extremely complicated because the ICIJ had technicians, computer experts to work on a special software that was designed for this leak to actually have a search engine, very powerful search engine, so that journalists from 150 countries could actually really look into the documents and start investigating.
So partner station France 2 streaming your documentary as of this Monday, and it concerns the former finance minister of France, head of the International Monetary Fund, Dominique Strauss-Kahn.
Yes, there are 600 French citizens in the documents, and Dominique Strauss-Kahn, former IMF director, he's very well known in France, as your viewers might remember. He was the French socialist minister of economics. So these pictures were filmed in New York, obviously after the Sofitel affair, which definitely got him out of the political scene. And there was a long trial in New York with these pictures, with three major reporters at our company, a news agency, Linda Bendel, Edouard Perrin, Julien Bécu. They were able to see that Dominique Strauss-Kahn today, who we kind of thought was happy, maybe not happy, but at least a quiet retired man, is leading his own company, and he's counseling many heads of states around the world and evading his taxes in France by going to Morocco first and then to
Avoiding
the
or
Emirates.
evading? Because that's an important
That
nuance.
is the debate. That is the debate. I believe citizens will say evading. Sometimes it's quite legal, and we discovered that Dominique Strauss-Kahn, before becoming a Moroccan citizen, should have paid some taxes in France on the revenue that he had.
Nathalie Janson, when I wore a younger man's clothes, I covered the finance ministry, and I remember interviewing Dominique Strauss-Kahn and him heartfeltly talking about clamping down on tax havens. This was in the late 1990s, quarter century ago nearly. Your thoughts on how the perception of this will be in the public image?
For sure. Anyway, anyone at the government won't say that he would agree with the tax loopholes because anyway, it's taxes that is not coming into for the government. So for sure, when you are a public official, you will not say that you are in favor of tax loopholes and the fact that people are working out, sending money to tax havens in order to avoid paying the tax because you are reducing your immediate revenue.
But does it surprise you, this story?
No, the tax havens have always existed and they will survive. They will change the way they are. But as we were mentioning, maybe they will be sent to the moon. But as long as you have different tax system with a tax system that are higher than others with a tax rate, you have a benefit for having tax havens. This is the reason. It's because we have different tax system with some with higher tax rate than others.
Craig Capitas?
Well, I'm not averse to treating Dominique Strauss-Kahn like a teen girl murder suspect on Law and Order, but you better be damn well sure, and I mean damn well sure, that he was evading taxes in France and at that time was not a tax resident of Morocco. Because if he was, then he was complying with the law and would not have to, in broad brushstrokes, be paying any tax on any income coming into France.
This is where it gets confusing, isn't it?
No,
Because
it's
on the
not,
one hand,
no, it's not confusing.
On the one hand,
it's clear. It's clear.
Well, you'll have to see our report, and please.
Well,
do
no,
not put our
was
story.
Dominique Strauss-Kahn.
Have you seen our story? You haven't seen our story yet because
well,
it's been on the air for a
was he
year.
residing in
Right.
France during the time
At
when
the
he was-
beginning, the answer is yes. And then, as you will see in our long investigation, along with Le Monde, the daily newspaper, and with Radio France, you will see that he himself was a key asset with the Moroccans to set up a tax haven city in Casablanca, and that he really designed and organized with his lawyers exactly how Morocco could attract some investors who would not pay their taxes for 5 years.
Was it legal?
It's a problem of, well,
It's legal.
Was it legal? I'm not a priest, maybe you are. Was it moral? Probably not. Was it legal under Moroccan law? That's the question.
it was legal under the Moroccan law that he helped design.
Okay.
And he is, you've known that, you know that he is a Moroccan citizen, but before that he was a French citizen and making a lot of money, which is fine. If he makes a lot of money, he has to pay taxes, and he has to pay taxes in the country where he was.
Well, let me ask you the question this way, Luc Herman. You have former leaders who, when they're out of power, monetize their address book. We've seen it with former French prime ministers, with former U.S. presidents, with former British prime ministers. How is this different from those cases?
Well, it's a question of morality. I have no intention of dictating Mr. Strauss-Stein's conduct, but being a former French Minister of Economy, being a former IMF director, being a former member of the Socialist Party, one would expect that he would do his business anywhere as he pleases in the world, and he can give speeches and be a counselor, but one would expect that if he is in France
then with all
quite a
due
long
respect,
time, that he would pay his taxes in France
with
or
all due
in
respect,
Morocco.
you're naive.
No, we're not naive. We're investigating on
naive.
some real solid documents.
Because what he did, whether you like it, the morals of it or not, was legal. And if he did this while he was no longer a tax resident of France, it was in all likelihood legal in France. If he was making money in France and offshoring it as a legal
But
tax
Craig,
resident
surely
of France,
you see the richness of it coming from the man who, to me, called out tax havens and tax
unfortunately, you cannot
loopholes.
prosecute irony in a court of law. And that's what Strauss-Kahn and all these other lawyers were saying. I applaud the work you did. But let me tell you, let me just add this. I'm in all likelihood the only person in this room who's actually set up an offshore tax shelter on numerous occasions when I went undercover for a year as a commodity trader to write my book. Most recently, during the Panama Papers situation, when we were doing a TV report out of Panama, I know how it's done. I've done it. I know all the bells and whistles. I know what they look for. And quite frankly, if Dominique Strauss-Kahn was making money while living in France and offshoring it, then the French government should go after him full tilt boogie for that time frame.
Well, that is for the French government to decide, and since, unfortunately, you have not been able to see our documentary, but you will, and I'd be happy to debate with you in the upcoming weeks after Morocco, when he worked and lived in Morocco and had designed this tax tax shelter city. Then it became then he had to pay taxes in Morocco, and then he moved to close to Dubai in a small Emirates called RAK, R-A-K, and we demonstrate in our documentary that he's not paying any taxes in RAK also. So it's a long 90-minute investigation.
I just have to ask, does he have to pay taxes under the laws of that particular member of the UAE?
No.
Okay.
So, meaning, and this is the whole moral debate we have here, and this is why I'm not going on the political side, I'm just going on a citizen, the public opinion needs to put more pressure on the politicians to avoid people to be able to do exactly what you did somehow 20 years ago.
I agree
it's still
with
extremely
your
simple
moral
to do.
stance is correct. I agree with it, okay? But legally, you're not going to win in any court.
All right, just before we go to the break, I want to just look up one other example, which you as a former Moscow bureau chief I want your reaction to it. Nowhere does Vladimir Putin directly appear as the beneficiary of an offshore account in the Pandora Papers, but many in his close entourage, including a certain Svetlana Krigovonik, whose rags to riches story now includes proof of the purchase of luxury real estate in Monaco. The files do not indicate where she got the money to pay for an apartment that cost $4.1 million in 2003. And it's probably worth far more today. The Pandora Files, this is the Washington Post reporting, saying it provides the first evidence that her holdings have extended beyond Russia's borders. What's interesting about this story, Craig Kapitas, does it inform how you see the Russia since Vladimir Putin took over in 2000? This was early in his mandate. And already there were people in his close entourage who were setting up accounts. Are they bagmen? Are they? Is this money actually for them?
The Russians call them quartermasters, and as you pointed out in the Panama Papers, and will probably point out in the pumpkin spice latte papers, which will come out next, Putin has been up to this from the very beginning, and it points directly to the problem. Putin is only responsible to follow the tax laws of his own country. Now, it's a kleptocracy, it's a totalitarian dictatorship. Guess who writes the tax laws there? So, is Putin breaking the law? No, not in Russia, certainly not in Monaco,
but
which, by the way, is under French jurisdiction.
When we come back, Craig, we'll ask you about these funds being siphoned off, what that does to Russia. That is part of the equation. We are watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the Pandora Papers leaks, a record data dump with journalists around the globe working on it. We're with investigative reporter Luc Herman, who's come out of his cave after 8 months, executive producer at documentary filmmakers Première Ligne. Your documentary on Dominique Strauss-Kahn's implications in all this airs on partner station France 2. Nathalie Janson, economist, associate professor at the Neoma Business School, and Craig Kapitas, contributing editor at Quartz and the author of Metal Men, Mark Rich and the $10 billion scam. We were having this whole discussion about what's moral and what's legal. Again, there's the case of the former UK Prime Minister, Tony Blair, and his wife saved more than $400,000 in property taxes. The London offices of Sherry Blair purchased from the family of Bahrain's industry minister through a holding company. Now, this is the reaction in The Guardian of the executive director of Tax Justice UK. It is unfair that if you buy a company that owns a property that you don't have to pay stamp duty. These loopholes are available to wealthy people but not available to others. Nathalie Janson, how easy is it to close these loopholes like this one?
Not easy, and also especially because, as I was saying earlier, you need loopholes in order to make companies still investing in a high tax rate countries. So in other words, those loopholes and the offshore exist in order for companies to continue.
Because in the case of Tony Blair, if I sell you a property, I pay tax. If I create an offshore company whose sole asset is that property, I don't pay tax. Surely it shouldn't be too complicated to close that loophole.
I don't know the details. I'm not a tax specialist. It's just that it happens that it is not that easy to close, and it can be. If you do that, maybe you will pay it indirectly for your economy. There is research that has been done on the consequences when you end a loopholes. You had the case in the U.S. With the loopholes with Puerto Rico. And indeed, the results of those research show that indirectly you have negative impact because you decrease the incentive for companies using the loopholes to still invest in your country.
Is that true?
It's absolutely true. And let's take away the ugly word offshore. If the sole asset of your company in the UK is a property, you can do the same thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be an offshore. No, it's legitimate. And by the way, it wasn't just the Panama Papers. You know, this was clear going on long, long before. Neither Neither party in the UK did anything to crack down on this. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans did anything to crack down upon it. And it's not in the American conscience until maybe someone stands up at a Joe Biden press conference and says, "Hey, Joe, what's about all this tax scamming going on in your home state of Delaware?"
Well, Craig Kapidis, let's bring in the Kremlin on this. Earlier, we mentioned Russia. Here's how the presidency there reacted to the Pandora Papers allegations.
The only thing that jumps out in the Pandora Papers is a demonstration of which country is the world's largest offshore and tax haven. And this, of course, is the United States.
Luc Herman, is that factually true?
What's factually true is that this is what the spin doctors wrote in Moscow. Yes, you mentioned Delaware. There are a couple of other states. One quick word about Russia, though. Yes, it is not really a democracy. It's more of an autocracy with people who make their own laws. The fact that so many people hide their money, they hide it to the people who lend them money. They hide that money and they avoid taxes to their own citizens, for just people who are struggling to buy a bottle of milk tomorrow morning in the center of Moscow. So I think it's just a good line from a good spin doctor, I guess, in Moscow to show the light on the U.S.
Well, in the Pandora Papers, there are plenty of mentions of tropical destinations like the British Virgin Islands, the Seychelles, Belize. But there are indeed murky trusts in the U.S., 37 of them in places like Florida and 81 in South Dakota. Karis Garland has that story.
It's known for the scenic Black Hills National Forest and the iconic Mount Rushmore, but not much else. However, the sparsely populated state of South Dakota is housing the money of some of the world's mega rich. According to the Pandora Papers, $360 billion are sitting in trusts in South Dakota, including tens of millions from outside the US in the quiet town of Sioux Falls. The files reveal that family members of Carlos Morales Troncoso, once a high-profile politician in the Dominican Republic, finalized several trusts in the state. They held personal wealth and shares of a sugar production company, which is accused of human rights and labor abuses. While it's not illegal to have offshore accounts, complex networks of secret companies can be used to hide the proceeds from criminal activity.
It's not forbidden to have letterbox companies, but why do such things? The question is allowed. One is allowed to ask it. Or to put it another way, there's no smoke without fire.
But what makes South Dakota so attractive for the world's wealthiest? If someone opens an ordinary savings account, the government taxes the small amount of interest earned, while any money they hold can also be lost through legal proceedings like a divorce. Trusts in South Dakota offer clients rock-solid protections, guarding assets from a host of potential claims. And since the state has no income, inheritance or capital gains taxes, it ensures much of that cash stays in private hands.
So, Nathalie Janson, this week they're having an important meeting at the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. It's supposed to be this launch pad for the G20 in Rome, where they're going to agree on global rules on taxation. Do you see the United States of America saying, well, we're going to crack down on South Dakota, and the president saying, by the way, my home state of Delaware, there too, I'm going to crack down on the practices that we saw in Karis Garland's report?
No, unfortunately, no. I don't see him standing going that way. No, the OECD has always been very strong in order to try to get the work done for more harmonization, tax harmonization. But it's true that, again, as I was saying before, it's as long as the tax rates are different and some of them are high. If you were in favor of a flat tax system where the tax rate was low, it would be easier. But as long as you have a high tax rate combined with a low tax rate across the world, you will have the tax loophole. So you could close some of them. You can defend some position, but you will reopen others. So it's not because you will come after a couple of them, maybe for political reason or I don't know to be.
That's important.
Yeah,
Let's talk about that, because when we first started getting these data dumps, it was a decade ago in the wake of the financial crisis. The financial crisis, which saw huge inequality and a lot of rage among people who vote. Now you've had the financial crisis, from which many never fully recovered, Krikipides, followed by a new inequality gap created by the pandemic. Politically, is it still tenable to keep the system the way it's been up to now?
Well, it will continue this way. There is no doubt about that. And there are many reasons. Briefly, one of them is, if you look at these tax havens, anywhere from a minimum of 75 to as high as 98% of their GDP comes from financial services industry. Am I correct, Madam Economist Natalie?
But haven't we had the example of Switzerland? A quarter of a century ago, when we started working on these topics, it wasn't the United States, the big enchilada. It was Switzerland at the time. And we thought, oh, now the Switzerland's going to open up some of its banking secrecy. The country's going to go bust. That never happened.
No, yeah, but Switzerland, you know, the Cayman Islands don't have chocolate. And Heidi's goats don't live in Panama. And let me tell you, you know, there's no ski slopes for tourists in the Bahamas.
But there have been progress. The OECD succeeded in getting more information. And it's true that if you look at the banking data, you have a decrease of bank deposits that were
correct.
That was
but where's the reciprocity? My question, Natalie, where's the reciprocity with Switzerland and the United States? How come Switzerland doesn't go and say, hey, South Dakota, hey, USA, why don't you do the same thing you're doing in your own, that you're doing to us back at home? That's what I don't get.
Is the United States the deal maker or breaker when it comes to these rewrite of global taxation rules?
Yes, they could be, because of their power. You were mentioning the pandemic. During the pandemic, the world pandemic, the business continues. And these very wealthy people or major companies have an amazing team of lawyers and experts who go faster than the States. So yes, Natalie is right. The OECD is putting pressure on a flat tax. It will be discussing this in Paris this week. You need to have courageous politicians, but then again, I believe it will come from the people who vote, from the citizens who will say, enough is enough. We're paying our taxes. Everyone should pay their taxes.
It's not an issue on any political voter agenda I have seen anywhere in the world. The specific question, should we get rid of tax havens? It doesn't exist. It's not there.
Come on, it's been debated numerous times on campaign trails everywhere
in
Europe,
Party
for instance.
Platform. I didn't see it.
Well, here in Europe, over what
Macron.
Ireland's tax rate is for corporate tax, over what the
but it's not a voter-driven issue. This is what I'm saying. Do you see?
Oh, we've seen some people demonstrating.
Is it in the Democratic Party platform in the United States? No. Is it in the Labour Party platform in the UK? No. Is it in Macron's party platform?
It will probably be raised in the Labour Party because of what Mr. and Mrs. Blair just did in London. This outrage definitely comes from the income problems and the people facing difficulties at the end of each month. So yes, we believe as journalists. We're not activists. We're journalists. We believe that all these documents that are so massive around the world will trigger a debate and pressure on the.
I think you're right, but you know what we're discussing here: how to do offshores, tax avoidance, is being taught in every law school and every MBA school in the United States right now. Every law school. Yeah. So when are you go? You know, is anyone
so at the end
going
at the end of the month when they meet in Rome and there's the final communique at the G20 and they announce that they've had this big breakthrough, will you throw things at your television set, Luc Herman?
I'm not an activist. I will continue to investigate and get all our teams to continue to work. Because one quick word, this is a journalistic adventure. These documents came from a major leak from 14, I think, yes, it's 14 offshore providers. It's great that there are leaks like this that we can investigate and come out with names, figures, and accountability.
The amazing thing about what you guys accomplished, which is terrific journalism and great reportage, is back in the old days, before the digerati came, the rule of offshore was you never digitalize anything. In fact, they were not the people who, when I was years ago doing your job, they didn't even like fax machines when they came out.
Get a bird to send a document.
What you would have to go, you would literally have to get on a plane and go to the offshore with the documentation and meet with lawyers there. So a great reason why these guys were caught were the computer age.
Let's hear from another precinct. The European Union insists that this is a problem that has to be tackled globally, adding that itself, as for itself, the EU has a clear conscience.
The EU, in many respects, has been a flag bearer in the fight against aggressive tax planning and tax evasion. Over the past 5 years, we've come forward with a whole range of different rules and requirements within the European Union.
Luc Herman, you worked on LuxLeaks, which involved tax evasion
in Luxembourg,
right here at France's border.
That's right.
Your reaction when you hear that statement?
They have done some things. I mean, Margaret Vestager, one of the commissioners, they've put some pressure on Ireland. They've put some pressure on Luxembourg. They've put some pressure on the Netherlands. Still, major international companies avoid paying their taxes in France or in the UK because they go to another member of the European Union. So it's partly true and partly very frustrating because they need to talk to each other much more. President Macron has said during his campaign and many times that he was going to with Germany, with Angela Merkel, to put more pressure on our neighbors. It's still highly complicated. It's not working. It's working about 0.5%. You get a little percent.
87% of Luxembourg's GDP comes from the financial services industry and the creation of this stuff. And oh, by the way, what was the name of the Luxembourg guy who used to run the European Union, who was the finance minister? Gee, I forget his name. Maybe you could remind me.
Jean-Claude Juncker. Let me ask you, Nathalie Janson. Okay, so it's an uphill battle if you want to fight for a fair global taxation system, but we've become a globalized world. So where do you start?
In matter of taxation, the problem is that government they want to avoid competition. This is because this is what we have.
How do you stop the so-called race to the bottom then?
But at the same time, it's as I was saying, we are looking too much as what we see, and we don't, and we tend to undermine what we don't see exactly, what is not explicit. And in reality, it's not. We have our French system that is complicated with different rates and relatively high rate compared to Ireland, for example. But we are still the first country to receive foreign investment. We've been in 3 years in a row. So it's. If we had not the tax haven, if we had not Ireland, I'm not so sure we will be recipient of so much investment. So what I'm trying to say again, I'm sorry if I insist on that, tax haven exists because we have different rate system, and because we have different, nationally speaking, we have different preferences for the tax system. We prefer a tax system in France. French people, they accept a higher tax rate than in comparison to English people.
Yeah,
or
the trade-off is they want a bigger
more
welfare
public
state.
Services.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you want to live in a world where you have different preferences, you will live with tax haven.
Still, and this brings us back to Luc Herman's point earlier about the money that should be going to ordinary folks. The OECD estimated for last year $11.3 trillion parked offshore. That is the equivalent of the GDP of, I think only the US and China have bigger GDPs than $11.3 trillion. It's just a staggering figure. Surely you have to work at eating into that number, Craig.
Well, they haven't done that. I'm sorry, the OECD is a toothless beast.
No, but
why haven't they brought this up with the past four administrations in the United States, going back to Ronald Reagan? We're sitting around here acting like this is a big, big secret.
But where do you start?
It's not.
Craig Capitas, where do you start? How do you eat into that so that money can be productive and go into
It is productive. It is not productive.
Yeah, well,
It
if
is
you don't think it's productive, okay, if the head of the OECD, Guerra, if he thinks this is not productive and a problem, then he should go up to Anthony Blinken tomorrow and say, let's get to work here and let's start by getting rid of what's going the offshores in Delaware, South Dakota, and Nevada and Florida, and we'll work on Panama and all the others. But that's not going to happen.
Luc Herman?
Such as Europe is trying to put pressure on Google, on Amazon, and all those major companies, and Apple, who was really present in and avoiding taxes in the US by being in Ireland, and it's a major challenge, but the money is not helping the US economy as it should, and this money is not helping the European economy, and it's making giants more giants.
In 5 years, what's changed is that we now have, those for our credit card, we can pay contactless there. We're using our credit cards a lot more than we used to. We're using less and less cash. Do you find when you did your research that it's actually going forward going to be easier to get towards more transparency?
It's an excellent question. It's one say that I've told students many times, journalism students, is that when these leaks come out, it should put a lot of pressure on major law firms or tax haven specialists to say, well, one day someone will speak in my company. One day I will be hacked. One day the data will come out. You're right. 20 years ago, there was a lot more paper. And now all these documents are all digitalized, searchable, and if you have a courageous whistleblower or someone within the company, there are many people who have said that this is how the LuxLeaks story started, with employees at PricewaterhouseCoopers who said, this is not right, this is not moral, not illegal though, because as you were saying earlier, the state of Luxembourg had rubber-stamped officially all the documents. Nevertheless, at one point, there are some people who are saying, well, this is not right, this should come out. So yes, this digital world, and that we're using less and less cash is more traceable, more searchable.
Correct.
And this should put more pressure. I hope, honestly, again, not being an activist or an activism for independent journalism, but I hope that this major scandal that is building up with the Pandora Papers will have an effect on these companies to maybe be a little more moral.
All right, certainly to look over their shoulder. Luc Herman, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Nathalie Janson. Craig Capitas, thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.